Seth Ferranti here, your guide through the dark corners of the criminal underworld. As an outlaw filmmaker, author, and journalist, I've delved deep into the minds of gangsters, drug lords, and prison gangs. But my journey doesn't stop there. Let me take you on a thrilling ride as we explore the hidden stories and untold truths that lurk behind the prison walls.
It's time to shine a light on Joe Morgan's audacious jailbreak that made headlines. Picture this: tools concealed in an artificial leg, a jail lock picked, and prisoners crawling through pipes to freedom. This daring escape showcased Morgan's street cred and cleverness, leaving law enforcement and the media in awe.
In February 1956, the LA Times headline read, "Hammer Slayer held in $17,000 bank holdup." Referenced in the article as the man who went to prison for the hammer slaying of his sweetheart's husband, Morgan was slowly building up his criminal resume. He was known as the kind of man who wasn't afraid to kill another with his bare hands or do what was needed to get the job done. At meals, Morgan sat with the Hispanic prisoners and started to form ties with the young Chicanos that would form the core of the Mexican Mafia. Morgan became a mentor of sorts to a lot of the young MA, teaching them how to do their time in San Quentin. Joe had a reputation long before because his homeboys in Maravilla were probably the largest segment of incarcerated gang members. Morgan was also known as one of the better handball players on the yard, despite his peg leg. His leadership skills were undeniable, and he became a visionary for the budding organization. Morgan became first counselor and then business guru to the new gang. Al Prophet, the director of the American Dope series, says, Morgan studied Aztec history and formed solid relationships with Mike Hatchet Eisen and Ruben Soto. In the netherworld of corruption and violence that existed inside California prisons, at the time, prisoners used to settle their disputes with their fists. But when La Eme came along, they started making and hiding weapons in strategic places on the yard so they could grab them when things jumped off. On February 24, 1961, after being subpoenaed to act as a character witness in a murder trial, Morgan masterminded an even-man escape from LA County after a jail lock was picked and prisoners crawled through a pipe with the aid of tools such as lockpicks and hacksaws that Morgan had hidden in his artificial leg. The jailbreak made the front page of the LA Times and was called the jail's largest escape ever. Morgan's criminal notoriety was growing when he was captured and walked back onto the yard in San Quentin in 1961. He was a California prison legend who'd escaped multiple times and served 14 years, mostly at Folsom. He learned the Aztec language and taught others so they could communicate in code. Morgan was a master negotiator, an expert on doing time, and had connections with all the racial groups.
Before we go any further, let me set the stage and give you some insider knowledge about the formation of this notorious prison gang known as La Eme, aka the Mexican Mafia. Imagine this: a youth prison in California that houses the most violent and incorrigible teenage inmates. It was within these walls that the Mexican Mafia was born.
When we think of prisons, if we bother to think of them at all, that is, there is a tendency to see them as institutions completely divorced from human society, little worlds of their own.
La Eme formed in 1957 at Dual Vocational Institution, or DVI, a youth prison in California that housed the state's most heinous, irredeemable, and violent teenage inmates. Legend has it that it was the brainchild of a then 16-year-old Luis Huero Buff Flores, who brought together the toughest, smartest, most dangerous, and ruthless members of various Mexican street gangs at DVI. The special forces of teenage Mexican California gang members who ruled their youth prison yard. From DVI, however, MA were transferred to maximum security adult prisons like San Quentin, where even more ruthless and murderous Mexican inmates joined their ranks.
The guards at San Quentin have their own way of describing the mood of the inmates. They call it the climate on the inside, and this summer, the climate is hot.
The Mexican Mafia did not materialize in the streets. It formed within prison walls, probably out of necessity. Like virtually any other prison gang, these guys needed to stick together to survive and thrive. The idea soon morphed into creating not just a gang, but a super gang. Eventually, that evolution created vast outside connections and reach, but of course, that kind of expansion also produced enemies.
At 40 years old, Morgan made history as the first white member to join La Eme. His commitment and dedication were unwavering as he embraced his role as a soldier within the organization. Morgan's fearlessness, intelligence, and willingness to resort to violence made him a force to be reckoned with.
In 1969, at the age of 40, Morgan was sponsored by his friend Mike Hatchet Eisen and joined La Eme, becoming the first white guy to join the organization. He was given the Aztec name Cocalizo and was immediately accepted into the inner circle, whom he had been working with in an advisory role up until that point. Morgan talked the talk, walked the walk, and embraced his role as a Mexican Mafia soldier. La Eme was founded on the principle that every man is equal, and the gang operated on a one-man, one-vote, majority rules system. Leaving their rivalries in the street, the top gangsters merged into one crew. Joining required a formal sponsorship. A made member had to speak up for the individual being considered for membership and take responsibility for them. La Eme was recruiting gangsters with serious criminal resumes who weren't afraid to use violence as an intimidation tool. Morgan was fearless, aggressive, intelligent, and had a willingness to kill when and wherever for the organization. In the pen, they say, boys fight and men kill. La Eme has a reputation for killing with reckless abandon. It was on and popping, on sight, as they say. Morgan was all about being the best gangster he could be and pushed his brothers to read books on martial arts and weapons. Another book in Morgan's repertoire included Gray's Anatomy. La Eme wanted to identify the most vulnerable spots to attack their enemies with prison shanks and strike the killing blow. For a long time, there'd been a close association between the Aryan Brotherhood and the Mexican Mafia because they have the same enemy, the Black Guerrilla family. But La Eme's sworn enemy was Nuestra Familia. About the same time that Morgan came on the scene, the BGF and NF formed an alliance. The lines were drawn in the sand.